What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Here for a solo episode today to recap a Brooklyn Nets loss last night in Boston on the back end of a back-to-back. And I try to refrain from game recap pods because, frankly, there's not always enough shelf life. There's not always enough juice and content from just one game. It's better to focus on overarching themes. But when it's a loss of this magnitude, 136-86, a 50-point loss, the second worst loss in Nets franchise history and the worst loss since the team moved to Brooklyn, after which there were some precarious comments from Jacque Vaughn and more so Mikal Bridges. Stuff that seems very relevant to the state of this team and where they could go moving forward. I felt the need to dive in and break down some of what went on here. And frankly, just an abysmal, embarrassing effort from the Nets. I'm a guy who's followed the team since the New Jersey days, growing up in Jersey, was there for the 12-70 season, have seen some just pitiful Nets teams and Nets performances. And for this to be the second worst loss in the history of the franchise, while I don't think the team is as bad as those 12-70 Jersey days or anything like that, it says a lot about how they can let go of the rope on a night like this, entering the All-Star break. And the only thing that saved the Nets from this being the worst loss in franchise history, which was a 52-point defeat against the Houston Rockets in 1978, was the Boston Celtics dribbling out the shot clock with a minute remaining and then doing it again on the final possession. So twice in the final minutes, just taking pity on the Nets, putting them out of their misery, throwing them an olive branch, if you will. And for that to be the case in a game like this, where the Nets are matching up with one of the best team and the elite of the NBA, it's embarrassing for that to have to be the case at the end of a game like this. And diving into just some of the numbers before I get into some of the quotes and some of what we saw after the game and how the team frankly looked from a morale standpoint. The Nets scored 17 points through the first 17 minutes of this game. The offense was just completely non-existent. They scored 30 points on 13 of 43 shooting in the first half. For the game, Mikal Bridges was the only starter to reach double figures. He had 10 points on 4 of 12 shooting. And then defensively, they allowed Boston to shoot 22 of 44 from 3. And it wasn't even Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, who didn't even play in this one, sat on the back end of the back-to-back, who was doing the damage. It was Derek White and Peyton Pritchard. And those guys were just absolutely frying the Nets guards, namely Cam Thomas and Dennis Schroeder, in that switch everything scheme that the Nets have been playing of late. And not that those guys are bad players. Derek White is frankly, one of the best stories of the season and a fringe all-star player. And I tweeted about it last night, just an absolute steal. The fact that the Celtics got him for the 25th pick, what ended up being the 25th pick in a draft and one pick swap, one of the best trades of the last decade, and just an absolute incredible deal that has vaulted them into being the best team in the NBA, among other things. But it being Peyton Pritchard, who's a fine player, but a guy who's frankly not even in the Celtics rotation probably come playoff time, it being him leading Boston in scoring is a good microcosm of the issues with this Nets performance. Because when you lose by 50, it's more than just talent. It's more than just coaching. You have to question the buy-in of the players because the effort in this one was abysmal. And the buy-in of the players, obviously, that going straight to head coach Jacque Vaughn and the rest of the coaching staff of not having the guys in a state where they're ready to play. Are the Nets, were they looking forward to the All-Star break? This is the last game, a week off, whatever, back end of a back-to-back, whatever. Celtics were on a back end of a back-to-back too. They didn't have Jaylen Brown. Kristaps Porzingis left with an injury in this one. Nobody wants to hear the excuses. And it's disappointing that I have to say that because after this game, Jacque Vaughn was questioned about the buy-in of his players. And as I said, the effort just routinely getting beat down the floor in transition, 23-6 in second chance points, no movement, no initiative offensively to spark anything in the half court. And Vaughn was asked post-game if he felt that he wasn't getting through to the players. And this is what he had to say.
Do you look at this and say, well, this is a unique instance where guys' heads were not right and they were busy focused on their mini vacations? Or do you look at this and say, man, what I'm telling these guys is not getting through. I'm not getting through to their heads.
No, Brian, I think it's far from that. These guys haven't played together. CJ's never played with Dennis Schroeder, and it goes down the line. Day'Ron just being back tonight, getting him some minutes. I don't think you can count on your one hand how many times you've seen games like this from this group.
And, my reaction when I see that quote on the post-game press conference, I wasn't at this game. I was covering it from home, but was following on the Yes broadcast and posted that quote on Twitter. It's just soft, man. And I understand that, Jacque, after a game like this, you don't want to rip in and tear into your players and just completely deplete whatever morale is left entering the All-Star break. You don't want to lose them. So you're walking a tightrope of trying to, hold people accountable, whether that's yourself or the players, while also not just completely tearing apart the team. But it's just soft, man. After a 50-point loss and the effort that his team put onto the floor, whether you want to take accountability yourself, whether you want to put some of it on the players, some of it on yourself, whatever, excuses aren't the way to go, because every team in the NBA can make excuses if they want to when things aren't going right. And, is there some truth to it that, these guys haven't played together and there's a lot of different iterations? Yeah, sure. The Nets have been injured. As I said, a lot of different iterations of the team. They just welcomed Schroeder, Cam Johnson, Lonnie Walker, Daron Sharp, all coming back from recent injuries. But I'm okay with that if this, that comment, if this is a 15 to 25 point loss, something like that, where the Nets at least showed some battle and some grit, some heart. But after a 50-point loss and you're down by 46 at the end of 3 quarters and none of your starters look like they showed up to play at all, nobody wants to hear it, man. The excuses are contagious. It's like, I don't know if you guys ever watched Hard Knocks. Jarvis Landry, got clowned on Hard Knocks with the Browns when guys didn't want to practice during training camp and talk about injuries. It says excuses are contagious. It's contagious. So kept saying contagious, but it's true. And if you ever played, competitive sports at anywhere near a high level, that once those things start to creep into the mind of players, of coaches, of whatever, and that becomes the fall and, where you go after a loss like this, it's not a recipe for success, for, fortitude, for being able to have any resilience. It infects your whole team. And it's not something that you want to hear from a head coach. Like I said, he's not going to rip the guys, but you don't want to hear that. And players don't want to be ripped. They also don't want to hear excuses from the head coach. They don't want to hear excuses from themselves either. So, it's about much more than chemistry in a loss like this. And, I see the fan reaction, all the vitriol is directed straight at the coaches and Jacque Vaughn, which has been the case all season. And I understand why, because as a fan, it's the easiest thing to blame. You often don't want to admit that the players might be a big part of the problem, because it's much easier to replace the coach and hope things will improve that way, as opposed to the players being the main issue. But how about a little accountability for the players here from Nets world? I understand Jacque Vaughn, him not having these players in the position to be bought in is a huge problem, and he deserves a ton of criticism. But when I'm, sifting through the rubble of the disaster of the night last night and looking at the reactions from a lot of the Nets fans, it's all directed towards Jacque Vaughn. And, there's no accountability for the players. How about a little accountability for the players? Where's the leadership? Where is it? On a night where you're losing by 50 points to the Boston Celtics and their reserves are just pummeling you, where is the leadership? You look at this team, and who are the top 2 guys that the players are going to look to make stuff happen? It's Mikal Bridges and it's Cam Thomas. And the issues there is that neither is a vocal leader on the court. That's a big issue. And it was evident in a game like Wednesday when Bridges has 10 points on 4 of 12 shooting. The defensive impact wasn't really there. I guess it's a little tough for him to make a defensive impact when you're switching him off everything on ball screens. But, last year Nets fans were complaining ad nauseum about the team's rebounding. So what do? They go to a drop coverage at the beginning of the season. Then fans are complaining about the defense. So they go back to a little bit of a switch everything screen. There's roster holes there, but just not an inspired performance from Bridges. And then the other guy, Cam Thomas had 5 points on 1 of 9 shooting in this one, and he's getting fried on defense. And I can understand that to some extent, because no one has grand illusions of Cam Thomas being a good defender. You would hope maybe it could be better than this and he could be an average defender. But if you're not going to do that and you're going to be that much of a liability on defense, you cannot be a 0 on offense like Cam was on Wednesday, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be the bucket getter, the guy who can make up for some of those liabilities as a defender with your offensive output. And to put up 5 points on 1 of 9 shooting in a game like this and just look like couldn't get by anybody, didn't really look like he was trying to get open too much off the ball. Same thing down the roster, but Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas are the two guys that the team is looking to make things happen. And they were nowhere to be found last night. So who is the guy in those moments that's going to step up and say, we're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let Boston go up by 45 or 50 points on us and let their reserves toast us. Let Peyton Pritchard just have an absolute field day, crossing guys over, stepping back, going baseline, throwing in reverse layups. Who is going to say this isn't happening against us? Who is it? And, it starts with, I guess you could say it starts with the coaching, and that's the issues going down the roster with guys not being bought in. But at the same time, a lot of the best teams in the NBA are player-led. And just in sports in general, there has to be leadership from within the team, from within the players. There has to be accountability. There has to be a guy that can rally the rest of the guys and hold people accountable on the floor. For all his issues during his Nets tenure, Kevin Durant having questionable decisions off the floor. When he was on the floor, he was holding guys accountable. He was saying, we need more from you. Even to Kyrie Irving, to everybody down the Nets roster, no matter who was playing, whether it was their best versions at full strength, whether it was G League guys, Kevin Durant was on the floor, in guys' faces saying, we need to make this happen. And I get that might not be everybody's leadership style. That might not be a Mikal Bridges or a Cam Thomas's leadership style. Those guys are, a little bit quieter and a little bit more lead by their play. But they weren't leading by their play last night because neither of them was anywhere to be found. And, all the vitriol, as I said, is going to be directed at Jacque Vaughn, and he deserves a lion's share of it, if not most of it. But I see a pretty glaring imbalance in the reaction to not holding any of the players accountable because, like a guy like Cam Thomas is a guy that a lot of Nets fans, wanted Jacque Vaughn to give the reins to offensively, wanted to have more of a feature role, wanted to be more consistent. They've done it over the last month. They've given Cam Thomas the keys to the offense, so much so that Spencer Dinwiddie, pretty much forced him out the door and he quit on the team because he was relegated to an off-ball role. And Cam Thomas has it. He's getting the role in a game like this for him to be an absolute zero offensively while having his normal defensive issues. There needs to be some accountability, directed towards him. And he needs to be a guy who needs to perform better than that. Because if he's going to be a star, if he's going to be the thing, all these things that Nets fans think that he's going to be, and that I think that he can be, you cannot have performances like this. It just can't happen. Because if you do, it's going to get embarrassing to the point where, it did last night. So Jacque Vaughn deserves a ton of criticism for how this team performed, the lack of buy-in, quotes I'm about to get to, but the players also need to be held accountable for not showing up to play last night and not having any effort. And that starts at the top with Mikal Bridges and Cam Thomas. And getting to some of Bridges' comments after the games, he had 2 quotes that really stood out to me after this one. The first being just about reacting to this loss and how you go about, moving on from a game like this. And he pretty much said that you can't brush it under the rug. You can't forget about it. It's not just move on. Here's exactly what he said, so nothing gets lost in translation.
You got to learn and then fix the issue. That's pretty much what it is. You can't just let this one go and think let it drop. Maybe if you lost towards the end, but you got beat by 50, it's not just let it go. A lot of it is not right, and you got to fix it.
And Mikal might have had a rough game, as I said, and he might not have, been in guys' faces, demanding things on the court. But after the game, that quote is a stark contrast to what we heard from Jacque Vaughn. And that quote is a quote of somebody who's angry, who's fed up, who doesn't want to make any excuses or brush this under the rug, and who wants to take that head on. So that's what you like to see. And then the second quote was more specific to coaching and talking about the offense and different plans for, when Ben Simmons is in the lineup and out of the lineup. Simmons missed this game, on the back end of a back-to-back. He's not playing back-to-backs, coming back from that back injury. Here's what Bridges had to say.
Again, it's difficult. It's tough. Just the scheme sometimes, just, being in mismatches a lot, switching everything. And then offensively, then again, it's tough again because a guy like Ben who plays and is not here today, it's a different dynamic when he has it. You know what I'm saying? And it's, nobody plays our guards been like anybody else really on our team unless it's a big, and Ben has it a lot. And even when we have been, it's not really a super offense we're running. It's like he gets it, goes, and we kind of play off him, and guys back up so he could dribble and then dribble handoff and stuff like that. But we don't have him out here, so it's kind of like we can't play like that. We can still play fast, but kind of get us in sets and do stuff. And I think we didn't have that tonight. I mean, we gotta know what we're doing. We gotta come as a team with coaches and figure out a game plan. And can't be the same with everybody. Can't be the same. Everybody's different. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, with Ben out there, it's a different. He could dribble handoff and stop because how teams guard him. We can't. We got 4 guards out there. With Clax, it's a different game. So just kind of know how to play that way and adjust off that.
Now, I have several reactions after hearing those quotes from Mikal Bridges. And the first, and the thing that I immediately popped into my head, is the head coach and the top player aren't on the same page. And that's a huge issue. And it's honestly funny because I just talked about this with Brian Lewis on my trade deadline reaction pod less than a week ago, the importance of being on the same page with your top player, because the Nets have, said that, or at least given all indications that they weren't trading Mikal Bridges. They were buffed offers from the Houston Rockets ahead of the deadline that would have returned them several of their first round picks from the James Harden trade. Said, everything they've said is we're building with and around Mikal Bridges. And for there to be quotes coming from Mikal Bridges like this after a game like this, where it looks like he's on a completely different page from the head coach of the team, it's damning. There's no other way to put it. It's a really, really bad look. And I talk about the importance of being on the same page with your top guy. Look at the Nets' recent implosion with their big 3. James Harden going behind the Nets' back and talking to teams across the league, reporters going so far as saying he was formulating a plan to get out of the Nets before his final season, and then coming back to the Nets and bullshitting them to their face to the point where they're caught off guard by a trade request to Philadelphia days before the deadline. Kyrie Irving expecting a contract that was never coming based on some of his actions there, getting to the point where he had to force his way out, and the Nets had to get whatever they could for him. Kevin Durant requesting a trade and asking for the coach and GM to be fired. You'd think that the Nets would learn a lesson of not being on the same page as your top player. And while I don't think Mikal Bridges is anywhere near similar to those guys in terms of personality or obviously the caliber of player that he is, or a guy that would do those kinds of things the way that those 3 guys did or conduct himself that way, him, a mild-mannered guy like him, stepping out of his shell a little bit and, pretty much openly criticizing the Nets' coaching staff after a performance like this is a really bad look. And you would think that the Nets would have learned what can go wrong when you're not on the same page as your top player. And that top player has to be in line with the coaches and management in terms of what the vision is from a team building standpoint moving forward. But then more obviously, how is the team aiming to operate on the court day to day right now? And it seems like there's not a lot of clarity surrounding that from Jacque Vaughn or Mikal Bridges. And the reason for that being, a lot of those things are so unclear because there are clear roster imbalances with this team. They don't have a lead scoring option. That's particularly frustrating for a guy like Mikal Bridges because he's being asked to do a lot more. He's being asked to be that top guy, and he's clearly not comfortable with it. He's a guy that's better when he's being set up by other guys, like he was being in Phoenix. And that kind of brings out the best of his game from his skill set as a spot-up 3-point shooter, from his skill set as a secondary creator and scorer, and then also being able to focus more of his energies on the defensive end. The Nets don't have that top scoring guy. And the other one is, Cam Thomas is expected to be a guy like that, and you bring him out. But then there are games like this with a guy like Cam Thomas. He's 22 years old. He's taken a huge leap this season. He's established himself as a lead scoring option alongside Bridges. But there are still games like this. We've seen several in the last 5-6 games where Cam's going to put up some stinkers, and he's not going to be there to be that guy. And then you couple that with the fact that he's a below average defender. So when he's not scoring, he's not really impacting other areas of the game. Those being your top 2 guys are going to present some issues because they're 2 guys that frankly aren't anywhere near ready to be that option for a team that's going to compete at a high level. And then you can go on down the roster. Cam Johnson returned in this one. he's been battling injury and is frankly underwhelmed when he has been available. And then you go past that, like Nick Claxton, a guy who's a secondary player, is going to do some other things. But even he has issues where when you're playing some of the more physical big men in the league and, who can do some things that give him trouble, that presents its own issues. So I've talked about this at several points throughout the season, but there's imbalances with the Nets and there's trade-offs with every player that you bring onto the floor. There aren't a lot of guys that are complete, two-way players who can dribble, pass, shoot, defend, do all those things. There aren't many of them in the league, but that's why, you need those guys to be able to lead a team and to be able to kind of establish the pecking order and give you a clear idea and, formation of how things are going to go and operate on a night-to-night basis. And the Nets don't have it. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of these frustrations from Bridges coming out, and you're seeing a lot of, Jacque Vaughn kind of spinning in circles and looking for answers. Now, do I think that there are things that he can do better? Yes, definitely, particularly with getting guys ready to play and just having them in the right state of mind. But that's easier said than done when there are all these issues, from a roster standpoint. And I said two things that come to my mind when I see quotes like this from Bridges. And that second quote, Ben Simmons being in and out of the lineup, that quote was directly about the Nets need to have a plan when Ben Simmons is in and when Ben Simmons is out. And, because Bridges is saying that they play two completely different ways when he's in versus out. When Ben's in, he's handling the ball a lot in the half court. He's spamming DHOs at the top of the key, which frankly, I think has its own issues because I don't think it's effective at all. And I think it's a huge issue moving forward. But with him, they're obviously trying to play faster in transition. They have him facilitating the ball. That's been a main focus of their offense when he's on the floor. Jacque Vaughn said earlier this season that they don't want to play in the half court. They want to be out in transition. But then when Ben's not on the floor, that transition game isn't there as much. So you have to play in the half court more. So this is, the issue with Ben Simmons. And I said this as soon as he got his back injury diagnosis earlier in November. I wrote an article about this right after, and I wrote about the troubling reality of Ben Simmons and his state with the Nets. And pretty much, that article is on Clutch Points. You guys can go find it. I'll link to it below in the bio under this. But pretty much, he's an unreliable player, obviously, was the, synopsis of the article. And him being that unreliable, the takeaway for me was that you can't have him, playing a feature role, playing heavy minutes, being a starter, doing these things within the Nets offense. And I get it's tough because there's times where it's looked good since he's been back and, he's created things and made things easier. But then he's out and he's not on the floor. And then, you have issues of the team not knowing how they're going to play because Ben has come back he's been back for 9 games. He's played in 6 of them. So he still missed 3 of them, whether that's for, he had a knee issue and they wanted to do some injury maintenance after his first game back. So he doesn't play. Then he's not playing on back-to-backs, whatever it is, I don't care. It doesn't matter. He's not playing, at the rate that he needs to be. And is that going to change moving forward? Maybe it can, but no indications have been given that is, going to be the case based off these last years. He's played in 50-something games out of 210 over the last 3 seasons. So to have him coming in and out of the lineup as a starter, then he's out, then the Nets have to play more in the half court, then he's back in, then they're trying to play in transition more. And even when he's in the half court there, it's completely different offense because you have 2 non-shooters and Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton on the floor. It's just so many moving pieces for a team that can't handle that. And from a coaching staff that clearly can't handle that right now. So that was the other thing that I took away from those Mikal Bridges comments. And there's not an easy answer to that right now. Frankly, I would potentially think about bringing Ben Simmons off the bench when he comes back and playing him in, a more limited role where he can come in and be a change of pace guy as opposed to working him up to a starter who's playing all these minutes and then he's out again and then the team doesn't know how they're playing. There's not easy answers to any of it. And that's one of several roster imbalances that I just touched on and several issues with the Nets that are leading to them not knowing how they're playing. But they better figure it out fast with Mikal Bridges because this is a guy who is their top player. And if you're going to be giving signals that you're going to be building around this guy and that you're going to be with this guy for the long run moving forward, you cannot be losing by 50 points and then having him come out after the game and pretty much openly question the coaching staff and what's going on because it's sending signals across the league that it's just a complete, dumpster fire right now with how the Nets are being managed. And could it change moving forward? I think it could. I think that this all-star break is much needed for the Nets. I think that, they'll look obviously to hopefully get healthier and have a clearer vision of what they're going to be moving forward, not have so many moving pieces in and out of the lineup, not have to change how they're playing all the time. But, if I'm the Nets coaching staff, I need to take a look in the mirror and I need to ask, does our top guy, Mikal Bridges, know what the plan is here? And if not, how are we going to fix that to avoid outcomes like this moving forward and to get the most out of this team and get him in a position where he feels comfortable with what his role is? So that's pretty much the long-winded takeaways from an embarrassing effort from the Brooklyn Nets last night. They're now 21-33, I think. 21-33, 2.5 games back of the Atlanta Hawks for the last spot in the Eastern Conference play-in tournament. So they're in 11th place in the Eastern Conference right now. They've got 28 games left to figure this thing out, to try to get back on track, to try to see if Jacque Vaughn can get these guys to play at a level that, honestly, I think they could be playing at. I don't think that they're this bad. I do think that there are issues and imbalances with this roster, but they're a team that we saw earlier in the season had some capabilities of things that they could do against some of the upper echelon teams of the NBA. So, hopefully they can get back on track there. They're kicking off a 4-game road trip when they come back on February 22nd in Toronto, and then they have stops in Minnesota, Orlando, and one other game that's not coming to my mind right now. So I'm going to be taking a few days off after this podcast. Then I'll be coming back, may do a pod giving out some, midseason awards and predictions for the rest of the way with a guest to be named later in the coming days. But that does it for this episode of Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening across the sports and entertainment world. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe on all streaming platforms. We're free everywhere: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Smash the like button. Leave a 5-star review if you can. Really goes a long way. You can find all my work, Erik Slater, at clutchpoints.com. You can follow all my tweets for constant news, updates, analysis on Twitter at Erik Slater _. I'll have more coverage for you guys soon. We're going to be coming out of the All-Star break, and that's got a stretch run coming up. Hopefully they can play some better basketball than what they did in Boston last night, and we'll have some more things to talk about moving forward. Be back soon.